Hello everyone. Again, this is Irawan. I'm returning to continue the introduction to DevOps. As I have mentioned in the previous episode of chapter 3, I mentioned about there will be an addendum. Now I'm going to address some sections, especially concerning about set responsibilities. This addendum is now focusing on how are we going to choose OSS license. Open source software usually has a license attached on it. Either it is completely free to use or to update, or may not be completely free to use, or even okay, free to use, but be careful when you are going to update. But sometimes there are also other kinds of license like proprietary or even no license at all. So this is important because not just for development, but also there are some use of open source that is, everywhere in the infrastructure world. Like you will see Wireshark and other kinds of open source software, and even the operating system itself. Linux, right? It is being used in either on cloud or on premise. When you are dealing with the on premise, you have to pay attention on the clause of the use of the license itself. Now let's start, and this is still chapter 3, but additional information or addendum focusing on choosing OSS license, open source software license. I'm Irawan Kusumadono, and I'm going to be your host about Introduction to DevOps. Again, I show you these icons like Azure DevOps, GitHub, and GitLab, IBM Jazz. I'm not going to tell you how to use for all of these four, but I'm going to use Azure DevOps as a sample. I'm trying to explain to you. I guarantee that I'm using agnostic way about regarding any tools. Let's start the slide first. Originally, we are coming from chapter 3. Now I'm going to focus on choosing this license. That previous slide I used for the thumbnail, but yeah, bear with me. License. Why I mentioned about this is closely or highly related from the previous episode because you remember that we have discussed general foundational set responsibility, right? First, both dev and ops must respect each specific accountability in their own departments. I have discussed this about what would be the details of many kinds of accountability, either inside the dev and the ops. Yeah. I've used the RASI matrix for this one, and hope that also brings a lot of useful information. These include acknowledgement that there's no interference, especially for the final decision about the outcome, whether it is finished or not, and whether they are good or not. Second is both dev and ops must have regular periodic coordination, of course, because that proves there is a collaboration between them. We don't care about whether there is a new app is going to be developed or not. And next point is the interesting, and I think we are going to discuss this further. Any use of OSS software on both dev and ops must be shared and always be discussed. Any use of that dev and ops software related for dev and ops, of course, must be shared. Any use. I should also emphasize the information that related to the use also must be shared and always be discussed together as part of the coordination and collaboration meeting. Some rules must be established together, including having a shared responsibility to pay attention to any copyright, copyleft, and permissive licenses, including the implication and consequences. There should be no exception to always obey the licenses and being aware of the consequences. And next point, last point is in meeting willingness to collaborate, blah blah blah. is the extension of the second point. We are going to focus on the third point here. Any use of OS software and the licenses. But before I continue, this kind of a discussion about the licenses, implications, and consequences, also discussion about whether we are going to govern the assessment of the licenses, that is also a separate discipline of knowledge. It is usually called SBOM. Knowing that there is a kind of a management on its own, it is called software bills of materials or SBOM. You have a inventory of not just the app that you are going to develop or you are still supporting it, but also the dependencies of the app, including the libraries that you use to develop, the tool that you use to, monitor, or maybe help you to provide trace or other kinds of profiling, for example. If it is using open source software, there should be an agreement on are we going to use that kind of license or not, for example. This kind of discussion may goes beyond this video, of course, but I'll try to simplify many known factors or general concept about this. So the next one is we are going to discuss about OS license. An OS license is open source software license, protects contributors and users. Business and savvy developer will not touch or won't touch a project without this protection. I mentioned about without this protection. So is there any kinds of software, especially open source software, that doesn't have license? Yes, there are. But I advise you to, again, don't use that kind of open source software. There are consequences and there are some kind of warnings that I think to me it is making sense. But before that, let's try to understand, and maybe some of you doesn't care about this OS license. I do care, and based on my own experience, most of the previous employment, like when I was in Allegro, when I was in under HCL, I was on site on Allianz. This license is very, very important because they know there are consequences, there are implications of using that kind of software, that kind of library, software library, components maybe, but basically it boils down to open source software, just code that is going to compile or can come in the form of binary, of course, but the basic starting idea, they are open source software and they have some kind of license attached to it. Is it okay to have a license? Yes, because that gives you clear definition, clear governance on how are you going to use that software without any kinds of confusion about, oh, is there any kind of implication or legal consequences? Because when you are talking about license, it is somehow you can consider it as a same behavior as you are having your own copyright or even patent, for example. But OS license is usually more friendly in the sense that yes, you can see the code, yes, you can use it, yes, you can use the code areas as part of your commercial application, as part of your software development, and that software development is building your app that is going to be sold as commercial app, for example. There are many use of this. You know Linux, right? It is also being used in the commercial environment. You know there are some kind of open source as well, like we know, and this channel discuss .NET, for example. .NET not just open source, it is cross-platform. And being kinds of both open source and also cross-platform, it means that you have to have a clear license attached to it. Clear means that you define the license as in a written way. You can just use the existing kinds of license types. You can have your own license, of course, but I'm not going to discuss that because I prefer to have some kind of a known industry standard list of license that I can use, trying to make sense of it, and also appreciate the initial intent of why the original creation or the creator of that open source software select that kind of license. There's a choose a license. These choose a license actually created by GitHub. They say not just created by GitHub, it also created by us, the participants, the user of open source software. And they mentioned it is using license of Creative Commons 3.0. So this Creative Commons 3.0 is also a kind of license, a type of license. And it is using Creative Commons version 3.0. So from user license, we have these three kinds of consideration, or can be seen as a way for you to decide. First, I need to work in a community. Okay, you can use the license preferred by the community you are contributing to or depending on. So in this sense, you are not creating the OSS from the start. You are just contributing or maybe fork the existing repo. And if you are a dependency that doesn't have a license, ask its maintenance to add a license. This point, if you have a dependency that doesn't have a license, if you use other kinds of open source software that doesn't have a license, ask the maintainers to add a license. The next one is I want a simple and permissive. One of the famous permissive license is MIT license. It is very short. It is somehow straightforward as it described here, to the point. It lets people do almost anything they want with your project, like making, updating, and distributing closed source versions. So originally this was open source and then you use it. Later if you want to also update or distributing it with your software. Of course, most of your software, especially application or any kinds of tools, for example, usually distributed as closed source, and you are okay to have that kind of situation because the original creator of the OSS software only focusing on they allow you to quote unquote do anything, including distributing the code or the component with your closed source. For example, Babel, .NET, and Rails use the MIT license. And you may ask, which one is correct? Is .NET using MIT or Apache? Not all of the .NET open source component are using MIT. Some of them are using Apache. But since those two are still using the same model of license, especially permissive license, it is fine. You can safely ignore the detail of differences between those two, between MIT and also Apache Foundation 2.0. They are permissive license. The next one is I care about sharing improvements. Sharing means that as broad as possible, like especially for example, you are the creator of that OS software. Feel free to share, but keep it as is because I care about the sharing, not the freedom to update or modify. I focus on care about the sharing improvement. Yes, you can still use the software. Yes, you can still modify, but there are some fine prints and something that you have to obey and to do. The problem of this kind of a license model is you have to open source your application or components or code or library that use this kind of license. So this is why it gives an example. For example, GNU GPL version 3 lets people to do almost anything you want, including you're okay to update or modify, except distributing closed source versions, meaning that any kinds of modification that use this kind of license, you have to distribute it as part of the open source. you cannot make it as a closed source. For example, there is a Ansible nin, and also uBlock Origin. Use the GNU GPL version 3. You see there's a version 3. The GPL version 1 and 2 is also part of this Copyleft licenses under this category of Copyleft licenses. I'm going to give you quick tour of this chooses license. I prepared this tabs open, focusing on chooses license. I mentioned about there is no license. You need to edit a license. There's also some kind of link to explain my project isn't software. There are licenses for that. I want more choices. More licenses are available. I don't want to choose a license, but there's some kind of nice information. What happens if you don't? So let's start with the consequences. What happens if you don't? I already opened this. This is the if you see the link, no permission. I already opened. No permission. It is no license. When you make a creative work, which include code, the work is under exclusive copyright by default. Unless you include a license that specifies otherwise, nobody else can copy, distribute, or modify your work without being at risk of takedowns, shakedowns, or litigation. Once the work has other contributors, meaning each copyright holder, nobody starts, including you. Even in the absence of license file, you may grant some right in cases when you publish your source code to a site that requires acceptance terms of service. For example, if you publish your code in a public repo on GitHub, you have to accept terms of service, of course, by which you allow others to view and fork your repository. Others may not need your permission if limitations and exceptions to copyright apply, to their particular situation. Neither site terms nor jurisdiction-specific copyright limitations are sufficient for this kind of collaboration. So it is not just, giving you confusion for you and for your users, but also can have its own problematic use. Like you may have some kind of a copyright dispute. You may have some kind of risk of takedowns, shakedowns, or litigation, for example. Of course, you don't have to do anything to not offer a license. You may, however, wish to add a copyright notice and statement that you are not offering any license in a prominent phrase, for example, your project with me, so that users don't assume that you make an oversight. To me, it is simpler for me to, let's say, just don't use any OSS that is having no license at all. It is not safe, and you see in this nicely explanation here. So recommendation for users: ask the maintenance to nicely add a license. If this doesn't work, just don't use the software. There is also other kinds of way. Negotiate a private license, and this is tricky because then you have a an in front cost that incur, or you have to pay the lawyer that has a specific capabilities to fully understand this kind of a licensing model, copyright or patents or whatever that is needed to before you are going to okay, please attach a license or private license or so on, so on. Yeah, you have to inform the original maintainer first. Tell them to I'm going to request a private license, which is something that may bring additional problem to the original maintainer because he or she then have to think carefully what kind of license that will not bring consequences for them, not just for you as the users. So please bear in mind, I think the best solution is just don't use a software that doesn't have a license. That's it. And I think this wording is a bit misleading or incomplete. Don't use the OSS software that doesn't have the license. That would be the best way, the best solutions. Okay. Now let's move about the permissive. You have here MIT license. I already opened the tab for MIT license here. So why it is mostly permissive? Because you see on the list of the permissions, you have commercial use, you have right to distribute, you have the right to update or modify, or in other terms, derive the software. And this is also important. You have the right to use it in private. There are some attached conditions, license and copyright notice. The license and copyright notice condition must be included with the license material. This tooltip is, yeah, I think I have to offer it. And there is also limitation. This kind of MIT license doesn't give you the limitation for the liability. Oh, sorry, it includes a limitation of liability, but somehow if I have read this many times and without limitation of rights we use copy. Okay. Limitation of liability is not quite clear enough. There is also warranty limitation. This means, okay, it reads this license explicitly states that it does not provide. Okay, there is no warranty, there is no liability. Maybe the wording is slightly misleading because it says it includes, but it says here cross, meaning that it doesn't have it, or it is forbid to have it. Like we have here, warranty doesn't have warranty. This license says the software is provided as is without warranty of any kind, express of or implied, including but not limited to warranties of merchantability, fitness for particular purpose, and non-infringement. In no event shall the authors or copyright holders will be liable for any claim, damages, or other liability, whether in an action of contract, tort, or otherwise, arising from, out of, or in connection with the software or the use of other dealings in the software. Just put it simply, yes, you have the freedom to use in commercial use, distribution, modification, including derivation, and use on your own private use, as long as the copy and the copyright notice must be included with the license material. This also means that you don't have to inform the original creator of that OSS software or the original maintainer. Just be sure to include the license and copyright notice condition within your distribution of your code or application that use this OSS software. Okay. There's a way to how to apply. And actually this page is also being used as a quick guide if you are creating new repo. Okay, I'll show you. And then to repositories. Let's say I'm going to create new repo. Okay, and so that you choose the owner. I use my own. There is a list of license. We have Apache license. This is also Apache Foundation license 2.0 as been mentioned before. We have MIT and other kinds of license, including Eclipse public license. This Eclipse publication is actually a permissive license. So yeah, feel free to choose. There is also unlicensed. And this is dangerous because unlicensed means literally no license, but it has written word on it. If you feel that, okay, I need other kinds of license model, like maybe you are going to use GPL or LGPL or something else or specific GPL version, I know it's not included in here by default. You can also choose to have a license within the list of about the license. So if I open that link, I have here licensing a repo, and you have a long discussion how to choose a license. They created a choose as license, and this guy is the one that we have here. I mentioned about creating new repo, right? It means that they only have a license only on the popular one like Apache, MIT, and as you see, most of the license here are permissive license. Then there is also the Copyleft, like you have a GPL version 2, you have LGPL, Lesser General Public License, version 2.1, for example. You have mostly permissive license in here. Let's say if you want to have your own choice, because licenses are not just in this list. This is actually a very small list. If we go to, let's say, I want it simple and permissive. Simple and permissive, you have MIT, for example. Then it says here use license preferred by the community. Let's open a new tab. Okay, they have the list. Apache requires Apache license 2.0. For GNU, of course, as I mentioned before, it recommends GNU GPL. NPM packages usually use MIT. OpenBSD prefers the ISC license. Rust crates are often license MIT or Apache license. And I think this is a good thing because somehow there are some kind of unwritten agreement. Okay, let's just use MIT or Apache for any kinds of Rust crates. Workplace usually GNU GPL version 2. Joomla is using GNU GPL version 2. Let's say I'm going to use the IC license. Okay, they have the link here. What is this IC license? Oh, it is permissive license. Lets people do anything without penalty, of course. IC license is functionally equivalent to BSD2, clause, and MFT. Oh, okay. Now let's try to look at other kinds of license. We have here a good sample of Copyleft GPL. Version of this strong Copyleft license are conditioned on making available complete source code of license work and modification, which include larger works using a license work under the same license. So as you see here, if you use this open source that has this license, you have to disclose the source, you have to license and corporate notice, of course. You cannot change the license, and if you have some kind of updates or modifications, that has to be documented. This is why many companies that are aware of this kind of copyleft licenses are usually trying to avoid them as much as possible. Unless if you are just using it as is, you are not updating it, you are not modifying it, you are not distribute the software as part of your commercial application. Although it is can be used for the commercial use, like you see in the permission, you can distribute it, you can modify, you can have permission to use the pattern that is embedded in the OSS. and also you can use for your own private use. Now you have GPL. So let's look at other kinds of license here. Okay, this is a quick list. I know it is not all of them. If you open the appendix here, you'll see that these are the known general known licenses. Let me try to zoom it a bit. You have here BSD0 academic free license. All of the permissive licenses, they always allow commercial distribution, modification, and private use. Sometimes you got the permission to use patent, but this is not the basic idea of having permissive. Not just that, you also doesn't have to disclose the source. What is this network use? Is network disclose? Okay, let's look at the note. Users who interact with the license material via network are given the right to receive a copy of the source code. Okay, that means that you have to also distribute the source code, and then you cannot change the license, which is why these licensing that has these three limitation, or I think these three condition: disclose source, distribution of the code, and the same license. Usually, these are categorized as copyleft. Let's look the other sample of copyleft. Let's use the full discussion. General public license. You have AGPL. You have other GPL version 2. You see. So you have to disclose the source. Okay, this doesn't have to distribute, but okay, let's close this. You have to keep the same license. So it's only these two. It's already a copyleft. And then we have something marked with different kinds of icons. Same license library condition. Modification must be released under the same license when distributing license material. In some cases, a similar or related license may be used, or this condition may not apply to works that use this license. I think it is quite confusing, but this is also not a permissive license actually. This is a copyleft because you have to disclose the source and also you have to obey the same license. And also the same with the GPL version 3 like we have here. So I personally suggest to be careful of any use of the copyleft software or copyleft license. Oh, you have another some kind of a same behavior with MIT. We have here Microsoft Public License MSPL. This MSPL I think is also I forgot who is the use of this. There is the samples of either permissive like this one and also copyleft. The description is too short, but I'm sure that this is permissive because you have the right to commercial distribution modification and you don't have to change the you can change the license, you can change the code to be closed source or modified. As I mentioned before, the focus on this one is permissive, making distributing closed source versions. So let's go back to the slide. Feel free to comment or feedback or ask me why this is also maybe confusing to you at first, and also a bit confusing to me as well when I first learned this kind of licensing. Okay, let's go back to this slide. I mentioned proprietary just for a quick comparison. Like proprietary usually means exclusive intellectual property of a company or other kinds of entities. Commercial use is not directly allowed as it may be treated as copyright infringement. This kind of limitation also can comes in the form of closed source and also open source. But that kind of open source is not actually open source. It is actually source open, meaning that you can see the source code, but you cannot modify, you cannot redistribute the source code as part of your own. You cannot, like do some kind of derivation, or you can use on your own private use. Just it's like a see it but do not touch it, something like that. You may ask me, is that kind of model is there? Yes, it is there. It is also part of the original release of .NET Framework back then. When .NET Framework is released, the source code of .NET Framework is released after .NET Framework 1.1, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it is there. It is called a shared source, but it is basically not open source. It is source open. Source open means that this source code is open. It is the opposite of open source. Open source means the kind of environment, the kind of collaboration and permission and many things are already open, not just the source code, but also the right to update, modify, and many things is also open. Now let's discuss on the copyleft and permissive. Quick recap. Copyleft meaning that it is focusing on sharing, not on the use and modification. Of course, commercial use is allowed as long as the original source and owner is explicitly stated. Any derivation of work or changes happen must also be stated. The license cannot be changed. For example, you cannot change, let's say, GPL2 to GPL3, or even change to extreme like from copyleft to permissive. That is not allowed. The derivation or changes may be kept open source. This kind of point, I think you should pay attention because almost 70% of copyleft license it stated that derivation or changes must be kept open source. Sometimes the changes must be documented in detail and also mentioned in detail. And of course, this depends on the actual license type, but I can guarantee or I can challenge you most of the copyleft license, almost 70 to 80%, they force you to document and mention the changes in detail. And the permissive is the one that having the most factors of freedom, like focusing on the freedom of use and modification. Commercial use is allowed as long as the original owner is explicitly stated, and there is no need to have permission from the original owner when we want to modify or update. I mentioned the copyleft is also you don't have to have permission, but then you have to open your code. You have to make your code open source. This permissive also have freedom to distribute without the source code. There's also this point. Some permissive license types may use the patent freely. If the patent use is constrained or to be forbidden to use freely, any derivation, modification, or changes must notify the original owner of the OSS first. I say this is a must. Some people say you don't have to, but I say this is a must because when you are seeing or when you are aware about, okay, there is a patent use clause, especially they don't allow you to use the patent, then you have to be careful because, for example, MIT doesn't allow you to use the patent freely. Fortunately, as far as I know, if you use .NET, I don't know about this Java. If you use .NET, there is no patent in that source code at all. In terms of or the perspective of the maintainer of the .NET source code, there is no patent attached to it. Only it uses either MIT or Apache. So you have to notify the original owner because there's no patent. This awareness of the license is also under the community of Linux, and especially under the foundation of Linux Foundation. It is standardized, and they have a list of those licenses. So I'm going to introduce you the importance of SPDX. This is why the title of this slide is Respecting SPDX. SPDX is abbreviated from System Package Data Exchange. It is an open standard capable of representing system with software components as SBOM. Software Bill of Materials, I mentioned about SBOM. And other AI data and security references supporting range of risk management use cases. This definition is quoted from spdx.dev. You see here spdx.dev. It's easy to remember. It is a common standard to represent component of hardware and software, including license type, SBOM, legal risk, and security risk under Linux Foundation. So this SPDX is governed by and under the supervision of Linux Foundation. For software, SPDX cover both copyleft and permissive license. It is strongly recommended to use SPDX license, especially specification standard version 2 to version 3, because it is widely supported and has the updated clear definition of clearly defined industry standard license. I mentioned about clear definition because some licenses are hard to understand, hard to differentiate with other kinds of license, even if they say under the same category of either the same copyleft or permissive. Sometimes the wording, like for example AGPL, LGPL version 2 is, to me, when I was trying to understand and learn, it's hard to differentiate. Fortunately, the list of SPDX license, the supported one with the version is available open source as GitHub repository. Okay, go back to web browser license list, and this list is always be updated. You have the open LDAP, public license, and so on, so on, so on. And you also have the deprecated. You'll see that the AGPL version 1 is deprecated as of version 3.1. So starting from version 3.1, this is deprecated. And the BSD2 clause-free BSD license is deprecated from 3.10. Okay, now we have here GPL. Okay, so deprecated. This is surprising. We have here an unit license. And unit license is a specific license that is for NUnit. NUnit is actually a unit testing libraries for .NET. And there's also some strange license like ECOS license. I'm not familiar on this one. I know BSD2 is supposed to be deprecated, but I think this is also permissive license. If I okay, let's try to look at. I think this is permissive. Free BSD license. Yeah, redistribution. Oh yeah, without modification are permitted. Yes, this is a permissive license. BSD2 clause and also BSD3 clause is is permissive license. So let's look at the non-deprecating list. Oh, they are not using the free, only directly BSD. You have here BSD3. Yeah, so it's going to be deprecated. So this already proved my point why I decided to suggest to use version 2 to version 3. Version 2 is still widely supported, not just by Microsoft actually, but also by other large companies such as Oracle, IBM, and other large companies such as Facebook. Facebook is also known to have a open source React, right? I know it is now called Meta, but yeah, especially the same. They supported the version 2 to version 3.0. So it is mandatory, and I think it's strongly recommended for you to understand the differences, and some old version or some licenses are not working anymore because they are being deprecated. So let's go back to my slide. SPDX is one of the way to help us to categorize and also to ensure that it is still meeting the industry standard, of course. An example of the SPDX uses, since we are in the .NET channel, right? In Visual Studio, there is a Nuget package manager. You see, Nuget package manager. This is the look of my Nuget packages list on my open source Aspire hosting for MariaDB. You don't have to pay attention to my project, open source project. I'm focusing on this license. Any kinds of Nuget package that is being used, they should have license. And for this Aspire.hosting, it says here MIT. You will see other kinds of license if you use other kinds of Nuget package. So let's open my Visual Studio. You have here the same look as I pasted on the PowerPoint. Aspire hosting is using MIT. This Aspire hosting has dependency as well. For example, it depends on OpenTelemetry, Poly.core, Semver, StreamJSON, RPC, gRPC, ASP.NET Core. So let's look at one of the dependency. It says here it depends on ASP.NET Core health checks URIs. Yeah, but you can ignore the version. It says here that it needs at least version 9.0.0 or later. It's like a greater or equal. Let's go here. Now it says it's using Apache, but especially the same is the same permissive license. So this is a good thing. And if you look at the documentation of this thing, especially the license, let's open the documentation. Let's go back to the SPDX. I already opened the documentation for the license expression that use the SPDX. Because how are you going to define the expression? It must be supported by SPDX standard. So if I use MIT here, okay, they have, there you are. Not Apple. I'm in the original MIT. Okay, maybe I just license. There you are. So the expression is MIT. There's also Apache Foundation. Apache license 2.0. So the form is like this. Apache 2.0. Let's look back at my Visual Studio. Apache dash 2.0. Looks like this license is using the form of the this column. This column is the original identifier. As you see here, all of the identifier doesn't have any space on it. This is to prevent any ambiguity because you can have more than one license. You can use both MIT and other things like maybe Apache license, for example. And the way you do that, you can use or, like mentioned. Wait. Is it in here? There you are. You have a license expression. You can have with. You can also have or, I think. So let's open this one. License. Oh, specifications. And okay, let's open the current one. So we have here expressions, cache insensitivity. Yeah, you have or, you have and also with. Or means that you can choose one of these, and means that you have to comply with both of these. So let's look at the. I think Visual Studio support it. Let's look at this one. We have here a package expression, package license expression here. So this is the way that you support the license expression if you use Nuget inside the CSprocs or VBprocs, or I think the procs files. You have the package reference, you have the way to specify the license expression, because these syntax are not available in the original NuSpec. You see here it says it's available in Nuget version 4.0 plus, meaning that 4.0 or later. But this is, I think, is a good thing. Okay, let's try to look for other kinds of information. What kind of version that this guy support? Package license expression. When using license expression, doesn't mention about which SPDX is supported. I see. So let's look at license metadata. SPDX license expression, MIT, BSD2, clause. Oh, this is now nice. Okay, it can support the or, and, or whatever expression starting from SPDX version 2. Okay, but at least, as I mentioned before, at least it has to support SPDX version 2.0 to 3.0, because 3.1, yeah, if you can guarantee that your IDE can support it, it's okay. But there are many other audiences out there doesn't even know there is a SPDX version 3. Sorry, version 3. So you have to pay attention and be careful. Okay, let's go back to my slide. This is .NET. Of course, I may be biased on why I mentioned about .NET. There is also Java, NPM. You mentioned about the creation of packages for JavaScript, and the management of that is using NPM. For Java, usually you use Maven. You have your own ways to define this kind of use of license expression, of course. Let me know if you want to discuss about that. I'm not an expert of using or creating packages for JavaScript, but I still have some experience of creating packages for Java, for example. Let's go back to my slide. There you are. You see it is there in my Visual Studio IDE. I'm using Visual Studio 2026, but this kind of look is also not much different if you use 2019, or even go back to 2017. It will be different if you use any Visual Studio version before 2017, and I suggest you not use it anymore because it is not supported by Microsoft, and it is too old, and it is not compatible with your latest version of Windows. The funny thing is, if you use any older version before 2012, somehow it is still working, but I suggest you not to do that. Just stick with the version that is supported by Microsoft. Like for now, we still have 2022, so just use that version. This is a quick, simplified decision making for license consideration. Of course, we have to check the license if there is a license or not. it doesn't have license, document it, and don't use it. So it goes right to the finish line. If it is having a license which is not no license, check for any kinds of custom license. If it is using custom license, please consult your legal department for the content of the license and the consequences, impact, and many things. If you're not using custom license, you can check for any kinds of SPDX. Is it part of SPDX 2.0 to 3.0 or not? If it is part of the SPDX, yes, then you can also check for either is it copyleft or permissive. Of course, if it is using permissive, document, use it. Feel free to modify, update any kinds of derivation is fine. If it is not using permissive, meaning that it's using copyleft, yes, you can use it. Yes, you can update or modify it, but please ensure that you are not changing the license type. Otherwise, it is considered as a copyright infringement or license infringement or license breach. Those two, permissive and copyleft, I say this is a happy path ending because as long as you pay attention on the fine print for copyleft, please don't change the license type. For permissive, okay, you can do as many kinds of update or changes or modification or derivation, and also you can change the license. As long as you are not mixing any kinds of license between those two, don't mix permissive with copyleft and vice versa. So any kinds there is a copyleft should remain as a copyleft license. Permissive is also should remain as permissive license. You can choose either change from MIT to Apache and vice versa, as long as it is still using the permissive license. This is why those two decision branch is giving us happy ending compared to other kinds of either unlicensed or custom license and so on. I said here, if it is not part of the SPDX version 2 to 3.0, then you have to consult the legal department because it may be obsoleted, deprecated, and it may not be supported by any kinds of industry standards such as, for example, SPDX. And there's no guarantee that you can make any exception on that because there is no industry standard. Of course, it's quite simple to answer that kind of concern. So this is the decision diagram or decision flowchart. And before I move to next slide, SPDX is just one way to make sure that you not just understand the license, but also to ensure you that you have meet the standard, especially industry standard. We all know that Linux Foundation is not a small foundation. It governs all of the many kinds of open source implementation, not just Linux actually. It governs the cloud native CNCF, SPDX, and many things. As I mentioned before, if you look at the SPDX website before, you'll see not just software but also hardware. There is also open source hardware. You can look or search on your own, not just open source software, which is why hardware can have its own open source model. I'm not familiar how the license type of open source hardware really works, but that kind of thing, as long as it has a license, as long as it has some kind of a packet data exchange standard or industry standard to define the licensing, and I strongly suggest please check with your SPDX. Is it part of the SPDX or not? Especially version 2 to version 3. Since now you are focusing on software in this video first, the problem is not just concerning SPDX but also part of the SBOM, software bills of materials. Actually, software bills of materials are not just discussing license, but also implication of that license, consequences of that license, but also possibility of being aware of if I, let's say, use that software, so let's say software A, it uses MIT, but in some sense it has some kind of breach. Like if I use that software, some kind of information is being transmitted without my consent. There's also a breach. Of course, it is security breach, but that kind of condition is part of the SBOM. You need to ensure that you have to document it, include it as part of your software bills of materials. There is also tools for that. For example, you can use white source, and now white source is called MEND, MEND. It's a very good tools. It's not widely used, but you can check your current version of your software or your dependency against the governance of SBOM. So software bills of material. Let me know. Let me know if you want to discuss more or further details on SBOM. I'm not the fully expert, but I have experiences on using this kind of SPDX and licensing, and I understand many aspects of SBOM, and it is a bit confusing, but you have to be with it. It is part of daily enterprise software development. Even if you are a very small company, once you are using any kinds of open source dependency, open source software, open source library, you are part of that agreement that you have to obey the license. You have to be aware of that. Having this kind of a mental model across either you are in dev or ops, it is very helpful because you understand the impact, understand the consequences. This is why I put this understanding of the license, especially if you are using OSS, as part of the shared responsibilities. It is also good opportunities for both departments to learn from each other. Maybe the dev understand more on the licensing. Maybe the ops understand more on the security breach. Like they can tell you, oh, hey guys, if you use this, there is an a flow of information outside when you, let's say, compile it or distribute it on many things. That also happens on the MOQ. For example, I'm not going to write this. I know that MOQ is widely used library for mocking unit testing as part of the unit testing, but that kind of breach was there. It happened. It is part of the breaking SBOM because you have to know it, you have to write it, you have to be sure that don't ignore it. So it's not just talking about license, but also security breach. But since this video is only focusing on the license first, I will talk about the security breach as part of the SBOM later, especially if you ask me bring more videos about SBOM. Okay. The next slide is the sample case study in .NET. Initially in .NET Framework, it is closed source, proprietary. There is a shared source, and I mentioned before it's actually source open, meaning that the source is open, but you cannot touch it, update it, or anything, do anything. Just only reading it. Don't touch it or update or anything else. And then you have Mono. Yeah, it was originally used GPL version 2. This Mono is actually a open source implementation of .NET Framework, and it was maybe it is ported not just on Windows but also on Linux, and then it has gained support from Android and also iOS and macOS. But now it is being replaced by .NET since .NET 6.0. Now we have .NET, previously .NET Core, but since .NET 5 They changed the name, it's just .NET. And it has use of permissive licenses, either MIT or Apache. There are some components that use MIT, there are some components that use Apache. Most of the time, they use MIT. If you look at the .NET Runtime, .NET SDK, .NET Core CLR, .NET Entity Framework, Entity Framework is also, yeah, they are using MIT. Other than that, some of the components are using Apache, some of the components are using MIT. But ensure that it is fine because MIT and Apache are using the same model of permissive licenses. So this is just to give you a quick historical background in terms of licensing. Now that it is now open source, you may think, okay, it's fine to do your own .NET and modify. Fine if you can ensure that you can distribute your own SDK if it is possible for you to do that. Because to me, I've tried and very hard to do it, because especially on Windows, you have to give a way to ensure that your distribution is easy to distribute. Like you have to craft your own installation, especially using the known way of installing, like using MSI, for example. But that is a different story. It's a quick sample of that. Now that you understand about this licensing, I hope that you take this as a very important lesson. I'm not trying to force you, you must understand it. But if you understand, it is a good start. No matter whether you are junior or medium or senior, because at least from the junior perspective, you have to understand that differences between those permissive and copyleft license. I know, yeah, you can consider almost all of us doesn't really understand the legal terms, but knowing the differences, knowing the impact, knowing the consequences, knowing the conditions that attach on each of the lessons, that gives you not just awareness, of course, but also gives you some kind of advantage of you really understand the dependencies of your application that you are developing, of course. From the ops perspective, you understand the use of the tools that you are using, not just blindly, use it, but you have to pay attribution, especially most of the tools that are in infra are usually using copyleft because they are not used for any further modification. Like that tools is just running and do the either monitoring or observability or many things, not meant to be updated. So most of them are copyleft. Any use of copyleft must be documented, must be written, must be governed, and also must be observed to not change anything. If you are using, let's say, version 2 of software A, you have to ensure that if software A is using copyleft license, you are not modifying the license, you are not modifying or updating the source code, you are not creating your own software A with your own derivation or any kinds of update, including the source code. If you decide to use and change it, you have to document it, you have to write it, and in some cases, you have to at least notify the original owner of that OS software that you use, because it is important to respect the original owner. If they decide to use copyleft, means that they are focusing on sharing their work, original work, and try to ensure that all of the software is being used universally with the same way without any changes. If it is version 2, it is version 2 coming from originally from them. If it is version 3, it's version 3, and there is no update or modification. because any update or modification usually is enforced to disclose any kind of changes. So fair enough, because if you use MIT or Apache, those permissive license, meaning that you are on your own. This is why any kinds of breaking, or something is not working anymore because you modified, they don't give you any warranties of that. You are on your own. So in some sense that we should not avoid any copyleft software at all. They are still useful, especially if you are just using the software as is. No changes, no modification, nothing nasty. On the other hand, feel free to fork any OSS that has permissive license to fit your own needs. And this is important, to fit your own needs. I usually trying to understand to fit my own needs, especially if the OSS software is so small in scope. Like for example, let's say if you use what is a good sample for that? Okay, let's say if you use software B. Software B is a component to, let's say, to enable you to lock something like a seri lock or end lock or whatever. Then you decide, okay, I'm going to modify part of the software or this OSS so that fits mostly for my own needs. If that OSS is using permissive, it's fine. And I suggest you to only use on your own domain or environment or your own application. If you start to forget and then make it public, your source code and also your own derivation of that kind of permissive OSS, please be aware that the original creators doesn't have any warranty, especially if you are doing your own modification or updates or something else, including you change the license. So you are on your own. The original creator doesn't have to be responsible for any kinds of broken compatibilities or many things. So that's fair. You have to be aware of that. I see some people, hey, I forked your code. I forked your OSS. Then why it is not working after I just changing some lines of code? They don't have to answer. They don't have the obligation to answer you because you do the modification on your own. Only if you find a bug, as long as you use it as is, they may answer, but again, they don't have to answer because again, all of the permissive license OSS doesn't have any warranty attached to it. So they don't have the obligation to answer. They don't have the obligation to serve you as technical support, for example. As you can see from the original intent, permissive, no warranties. Okay, I hope you can understand. And this addendum is finished. And my goal to present this is actually give you some more awareness why this shared responsibility is important. I hope I can have another video as an addendum in terms of discussing the security as part of the SBOM. And again, if you have any more requests on SBOM, please let me know in the comment. I may release a community post, YouTube community with poll. Are you going to vote for either SBOM or not later in this week? Hopefully, if I got enough answer, I expect more than 30 or at least 20% answered the survey, then I will create it, or maybe not. Okay, as usual and as always, don't forget to like, subscribe. If you enjoyed the video, not just like but also subscribe, and feel free to comment as well. I'm open for any questions because that gives me more encouragement to continue this series of video, of course, especially discussing DevOps. I'll see you on the next video, and don't forget, coding is happiness. Bye bye.